Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll give everyone a minute or two to join. So if you want to go ahead, grab some water, a snack, feel free to do that, and we'll get started in just another minute or two. Okay, it looks like we have a good group here. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. Really excited for our session here today and the topic that we're going to be covering. I want to go ahead and start off with a round of introductions so you know who we all are. So I'll go ahead and kick us off. Hi, everyone. My name is Bridget Moran, and I'm our Senior Content Manager here at CourseDog. So really investigating all things academic operations. So super excited to be here today. And I'll go ahead and let Claire introduce herself now.
Thank you, Bridget. Hi, everyone. Great to be here with all of you. Claire, VP of Product here at CourseDog. I've been part of the education world in one way or another my whole life, and now very grateful that I get to be working to shape the future of higher education with all of you. Really passionate about this topic, and I look forward to discussing strategies to modernize your academic operations together today.
Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and get into our agenda here. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to make sure that we're giving everyone a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. So first off, we'll talk about, what exactly do we mean by academic operations? We want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So we'll briefly run through that, talk about, what functions academic operations encompass, how it impacts students, and then, of course, how it can benefit institutions as well. From there, we'll go ahead and look at the three main buckets of academic operations. So we'll walk through scheduling, curriculum, assessment, and really talk about, what functions live under each of these three categories and how can we think more strategically about them. Finally, we'll go ahead and take a look at some best practices when you're thinking about, maybe overhauling just a part of your academic operations, or maybe even thinking about overhauling your entire ecosystem. Of course, at the end, we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A, but that being said, if you do have any questions that come up through the webinar, feel free to drop them either in the chat or Q&A function, and we'll try to get to them, as they come up or definitely at the end of the webinar. And then one final piece of business I do want to cover. I know we always get this question. Yes, we will be sending out the link to the deck and the recording after this, so that way everyone has it for their reference, so no need to worry there. Okay, great. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started then. As I just mentioned, I want to quickly walk through what we mean when we talk about academic operations, make sure we're all on the same page before we get into the rest of today's presentation. So I'm sure that probably each person on the line here has a slightly different way that they define academic operations. I know that, of course, this depends on, how your institution is organized and who is running particular functions. That being said, here at CourseDog, at a really high level, we like to think of academic operations as all of the functions that really contribute to delivering the educational experience. And I think probably pretty unsurprisingly to most of us, this encompasses quite a lot that you all do at your institutions. And ACRO actually put out a book last year on the subject of academic operations, and super interesting, but they actually put together a formal definition of how they think about academic operations. And you'll see, on the left side of this slide here, it encompasses quite a list. So curriculum management, syllabi, the catalog, scheduling, accreditation, and much more here. But what I think was actually most interesting about how they defined it is they note that yes, of course, all of these functions are, critical for running an institution, but they're also super important when it comes to thinking about learner success, learner persistence, and of course completion. And so I think this is a really great note, and I want to make sure that we're really, I think, grounding ourselves in terms of, how academic operations are impacting students. So we put together some data on this because we really wanted to see, how students are thinking about this. So about a year or so ago, we partnered with College Pulse to conduct a survey of 1,500 students across the US. And the focus of this survey primarily touched on some of the more student-facing functions that we'll be talking about today. So thinking about, how are they interacting with the course schedule? How are they interacting with the catalog? And the results of the survey were pretty interesting. Definitely a lot of food for thought here. But starting with 1 in 4 students said that they have troubles navigating degree requirements. So I think this could mean a couple of different things. Perhaps the catalog is difficult to navigate, program maps don't exist for them to reference, or maybe there's just an overwhelming number of courses for them to choose from, and it's really difficult to sift through all of those. So I think it's even more interesting, though, when you start to look at the course scheduling piece of this. We really heard from students that this is an area where they are frequently struggling. So 60% of students that we surveyed reported that they, struggle to get into those classes that they need to meet requirements. And, I think this is concerning for a number of reasons, right? If students can't access the classes that they need, this puts them, at risk for delayed completion. And, this could lead to scenarios where they're delaying prereqs that they need to take, or perhaps, they're cramming classes into following terms, and it really makes it difficult for them to stay on top of their studies. And then, of course, there is, kind of the worst case scenario if students can't get into their classes. This one, I think, was probably the most impactful to me when I looked here. But 1 in 3 of the students that we surveyed said that they would consider leaving their institution if they weren't able to enroll in the classes that they need. So this is pretty staggering, right? And I think that this data really just supports ACRA's thesis here that, when academic operations are managed well, this really contributes to learner success. But on the flip side, when they're poorly managed, it can really hinder student outcomes. So we know, of course, this is a driving force for many of you, probably why you're on the line today. But of course, not the only reason, probably why you've been tasked with looking at your academic operations. So we're going to do a quick poll here. Would love to learn from everyone. Why are you here today? Why are you thinking about modernizing your academic operations? So let's go ahead and kick off the poll. We'll keep it open for about 60 seconds or so. We were kind here and let it be multiple choice. So we'll go ahead and let you select multiple here, but excited to see the results come in. Okay, I'm seeing these results come in here, which is great. We'll keep it open for another 15 or 20 seconds or so. So if you hadn't had a chance, feel free to go and select your answers here. Okay, I think we can go ahead and close the poll here, and we'll share the results out to everyone. Okay, great. So it looks like we have an interesting mix here. The top one coming in at reducing manual work and saving time. Yes, I think that this is really going to resonate with the rest of what we're going to be talking about today. I know a lot of you, are spending time manually going through and making changes, perhaps line by line, page by page. So we, of course, want to try to get rid of that work so you have more time to focus on more strategic activities. Claire, do you want to jump in here? Any thoughts here about these poll results?
No, I mean it's always insightful to see, and I think we definitely see the dual motivation and then the different types of outcomes that we see institutions get, both on reducing the manual work, and then really that being a big part of what then in turn enables you to promote better student outcomes. So really can't focus on being data driven, on looking at the bigger picture, focusing on retention and completion, if your time is bogged down by manual processes, right? So it's really twofold, I think, in how we approach it with institutions. And so um, you're not alone, and definitely what we see, I think, across all our partners here.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great point there, Claire. So I think the poll really reflected very well what we saw on the slide here. People are here for a multitude of reasons, and just like we have here, efficiency, right? I think a lot of times it feels like a word that's overused, but clearly it's something that we're all feeling in our day to day. You know, I think particularly as folks are working with small staffs, you know, with those tight resources, we really can't afford to be using that time, those hours and hours, to be, you know, conducting that manual data entry, making those line by line changes, you know, hunting through the emails, spreadsheets, folders, you name it. I'm sure that you are in a million places trying to find all that information that you need, which I think, of course, you know, ties really directly into data accessibility. Our institutions have so much data, but that can be overwhelming and it can be really difficult to access. So that information is living across, you know, your SIS, various platforms, tools, and a lot of times it's difficult to access. You know, only folks who maybe have that technical expertise are really able to go in there and get the data. So because of that, you know, oftentimes it's just sitting there, and unfortunately, you're not really able to use it to help inform your decisions. And then there, of course, there are student outcomes. You know, we just talked about this on the previous slide, but making sure students are, you know, getting those courses they need, being able to access the information, all of that good stuff. And then finally, resource allocation. You know, how are we using our space and instructional resources most effectively? And, you know, where are we making sure that we're offering, you know, enough sections to meet student demand versus where can we maybe be pulling back a bit? So these are some of the guiding principles that are really going to found our discussion today. You know, at risk of sounding like a broken record, you know, we will be talking about this, I think, on multiple slides. But, you know, hopefully this is good news, though, that I think there are a lot of ways where we can really, you know, be making strides to meet some of these goals.
Great. So we're gonna start this journey by really looking at some strategies to revamp your curriculum processes specifically. Now, there's a lot we can cover here, on from the curriculum approval process to syllabi to the course catalog. And so we could absolutely spend an hour on each of these individually. And so for the sake of today, we're gonna go through each function at a high level, really aiming to give you the end-to-end picture and share what we believe are the most impactful practices for transforming each function and that we've seen being most successful at institutions across the US. So starting here around curriculum management, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the curriculum approval process can be really trying. We've listed just a few of the challenges at the top of the slide here that we're going to go into. First, transparency and accessibility. So I'm sure you can all relate to with curricular changes moving through, whether you're using paper forms, emails, spreadsheets, maybe separate point solutions, and other potential tools you might be leveraging. The faculty and staff who submit the original curriculum changes often really have no visibility into the approval process it then follows. This isn't only frustrating, but also prevents faculty really from knowing who to reach out to even get an update on the status on their proposal and when they might see that change come to fruition. The second and third challenges listed here are closely intertwined. Curricular changes we see span months, maybe weeks at best, typically months at best, and can often take 1 to 2 years. That is because changes span extended periods in each stage, which really lengthen then the overall time to actually reach a decision. Now, what we see is that this lengthy process is often due to deadline challenges that institutions face. In some cases, there may not actually be any deadlines, or deadlines aren't enforceable for the right people to review and to move a proposal to the next stage. Due to the lack of transparency and the disparate methods of moving those curricular changes from one step to the next, really no one clearly knows how long changes have been in each stage and when they're supposed to move to the next. So how do we solve these challenges? The biggest key that we've seen work for institutions is to move to what we call a workflow-based system. So moving to a central curriculum approval system that leverages workflows allows you to gather all the information in one place and keep submissions on track throughout the entire process and across all proposals at the institution. So what this looks like at a high level is that your institution will map out what your curriculum approval forms and the steps the submission takes are as it moves through the approval process, right? So who needs to approve, based on what conditions, at what point does the curriculum committee come in, which types of proposal might require higher level approval, etc. And also the set of information that needs to be filled out to submit a proposal in the first place. What that then can result into is submitters logging into the system, being presented with a pre-built form that they fill out, knowing exactly what information they need to be submitting. That ensures that all proposals are submitted with all that necessary information. And then you have full confidence that the proposal will move through those predetermined set of steps where all the necessary parties have access to the proposal at each stage, have that visibility, and get notified when they need to take an action, whether it's reviewing, proposing changes, approving, moving to the next phase, etc. Now, let's talk a little bit about what that then means on the catalog side of things. Obviously, you're constantly improving your curriculum so that you can deliver the best education possible for students, right? And that needs to be displayed on your catalog. Now, historically, the catalog has required significant manual work on the part of administrators and oftentimes on a really small team at an institution, really leading the charge on creating and maintaining the catalog. That has included, and for a lot of institutions still includes, a really labor-intensive and error-prone process of going page by page each year to update both curriculum information as well as policies and potential branding changes manually. Now, managing a PDF isn't just frustrating for admins, but also for students and prospective students trying to navigate it. This outdated technology often requires students to scroll through multiple pages of information and make it really difficult and not intuitive for students to find exactly what they need to guide them either towards your institution or once at your institution through their degree and program requirements. That can really easily change with an online catalog that is integrated directly with your curriculum management system. We've seen institutions completely change how they think and how they work through their catalog, with admins pushing information from their curriculum database directly into their catalog, having that be completely automated. And you don't never have to worry anymore about whether your curriculum information is actually aligned with what you're displaying to students on your catalog, making sure that all of that obviously aligns with the effective term and catalog year of the offset catalog. Even more importantly, likely is that students will no longer need to go through endless scrolling, and you'll really be able to deliver an experience for your students that they need, that they deserve, and that they're really used to across the rest of their experience on the internet and going through their life more broadly. And so really having that searchable catalog is just much more in line with student expectations now, used to interacting with other places online. Similarly, we've seen that the syllabus process has historically been both manual and error-prone. Traditionally, what we see at most institutions is that each faculty tends to create their own syllabus and really on their own terms and really independently from potentially any other faculty and any kind of oversight from the institution. So they kind of decide and sometimes figure out what structure they should be using and what information they should be including. Faculty typically have to rely on syllabi from previous terms and potentially, depending, actually have to create new syllabi from scratch each term. Now, the issues that we see with this type of complete manual build from scratch is really just usually really error prone and really gives your institution no oversight, especially when it comes to institution-wide policies and information that needs to be aligned across all your syllabi. Obviously still giving faculty all the freedom and flexibility that they need and want for their course-specific information. And so we typically see large amounts of time spent formatting, chasing down policies, and really inputting new information, taking away from where faculty, ideally should be able to focus and serve best, really instructing, supporting students, and conducting research. Now, leveraging syllabi templates and auto-populate features really allows institutions to ensure that your syllabi are clear, accurate, and consistent with other syllabi at your institutions so that students know what to expect and do not get confused by conflicting information on other course syllabi. For example, academic honesty and accessibility policies are often included in syllabi, and it's really critical for your institution that instructors don't inadvertently publish inaccurate policies potentially pulled from older versions of the syllabus. The other advantage of pre-made templates is that they also provide all your faculty with clear institutional branding, formatting, and the standard policies so that they don't need to reinvent the wheel each term and can spend their time on curricular content. The brand consistency can definitely be a big plus for institutions across things like fonts, colors, formatting, etc. With that type of preset formatting really allowing you to display a consistent brand identity for your institution, not only across your catalog, across your institution website, but also across all these other student-facing documents that you put out there in the world, including those course syllabi. Now, finally, consider how you could centralize your repository of syllabi. Rather than having to hunt down syllabi from multiple places, which we typically see, you can get the opportunity to store all of them in one platform. This enables you and your students to search, save, export the syllabi, and really have them stored and often published in one place, which is becoming a more and more common requirement from accrediting bodies. It also obviously enables faculty to find syllabi from previous terms and make sure that they're able to quickly leverage and change information to save that time. The last point I want to touch on the curriculum side of the house is around the analytics. So as we saw, a lot of you want to be able to better leverage data to make decisions throughout your academic operations, including curriculum decisions. And these types of analytics, in this case focused around your curriculum, can really help all of you understand where students struggle on their academic journey and identify high-risk points, really taking that zoomed out view, whether it's across programs, across degrees, across different types of students, and really giving you the ability to use that data to identify things such as high-risk course combinations, where students are more likely to fail, or just more broadly, any insight on where students are more likely to experience attrition on their academic path, whether that's switching from a program or from a degree to another, or just leaving your institution altogether. Now, we know that historically it's been very challenging to access this type of data, and more importantly, to access it in the way in the visualizations that are actually most helpful for you, and in the places where you're then taking resulting actions, including proposing changes to the curriculum as a result, such as rethinking a prereq, rethinking the order of courses on a program, etc. And what we've seen is, without access to the necessary information, any curriculum analytics practices were really piecemeal, either piecemeal if you were trying, or just non-existent at all. Typically we see that faculty and staff just did not have the time or expertise needed to pull this information, interpret it, and act on it, or that reaching out to IR was really lengthy and ended up not delivering the information needed in time to then propose changes.
Thanks, Claire. That was, I think, a really great overview of all the different functions in curriculum and how we can start thinking about them a little bit differently. So similarly, I want to now go ahead and walk through the different functions that live under scheduling. So of course, this creates the big one, creating the academic schedule, but also thinking about the other associated areas like faculty workload assignments, how you're projecting that course demand, and then also thinking about how you're managing classroom and event space. So similar to many of the points that Claire was just talking about, we'll take a look at how can we move away from some of these manual scheduling processes and really consolidate them into one place. So first we'll go ahead and take a look at the big one here, creating the course schedule. I know that this can be quite a beast. I know that, folks in the registrar's office, academic units spend quite a lot of time doing this each term. And so traditionally the way that we've seen folks create their course schedule is that each academic unit goes ahead and creates their own schedule for the following term. And then they're going ahead and sending it to the registrar's office where they're then compiling everything and entering it into the SIS. However, I'm sure as many of you know, this can come with quite a bit of challenges. So the first thing I wanted to call out here is that departments often have little insight into what other courses other departments are offering and when they're being scheduled. And because of this lack of transparency, we see that oftentimes, conflicts are occurring, or, a very high percentage of your courses are being scheduled just during those short amount of prime time hours. I think another thing that results, of this type of process is we see that often faculty preferences and availability take preference when the course schedule is being created. So with little information about how the course schedule perhaps was or maybe was not meeting student needs in previous years, the course schedule remains largely the same. Folks are rolling over course schedules and really just basing it around, maybe faculty availability. And this isn't just something that we hear from our partners who we work with, but ACRA actually conducted a survey on course scheduling a couple of years ago. And they found that when it comes to creating the course schedule, the top 3 factors that schools use are schedules from the previous term, faculty availability, and faculty preferences. So while it of course makes sense to factor these into your consideration, I do think it's interesting that student need wasn't in those top 3 factors considered. And then, of course, I think, the decentralized nature of scheduling can make it challenging to enforce some of those scheduling policies, such as standard meeting patterns, or perhaps limiting the number of schedules that can be offered during prime time. And this really makes it challenging for the folks who work in the registrar's office. They often have to, check the schedules against each other, and maybe go back and forth after the fact to make sure that they're trying to correct for some of these errors that might happen. So how have we seen institutions move away from this? Again, similar to some of the points Claire was talking about, really moving it all into one central location. So when all of the departments are able to create their schedule in the same tool, this really eliminates the need to be sending spreadsheets back and forth, comparing when sections are scheduled. And, I think this really makes it easier for everyone. Of course, the registrar's office, but also for those department schedulers who do spend significant time creating the schedule. So departments can now see, when other departments are planning to offer their sections and at what time. And the registrar's office can also go ahead and build some of those scheduling rules into the platform, eliminating that back and forth that so often happens. So departments will be guided, on how can we make sure that all of our courses are being offered during standard meeting patterns, and how can we make sure that we're following other policies. And I think this is really great because I think at the heart of a lot of these policies is making sure that we're putting students first. So making sure that students aren't having to choose between classes because, oh, there's a 10-minute overlaps in timing, so I can only choose one, or, oh, maybe two of my prerequisites are only offered at the same time. So really thinking more intentionally about how we can avoid some of those problems coming up in the first place. So I think, of course, this is all really great when it comes to the actual course creation process, but something we also like to think about here at CourseDog is how we can be more proactive when we're thinking about creating the course schedule. I think given like what we just talked about, how laborious it can be to create the schedule, many schools just roll over the schedule from term to term. And I think this makes sense. Of course, it would be silly to start from scratch every single time. But when we are rolling over the schedule, I think we're losing an opportunity to see where we might need to make some changes. So one of our registrars who we work with, I was talking with him about this problem, asking him how they approached it, and he said, rolling over the course schedule also means rolling over your problems. And I think that was a really good way of putting it. One of the ways that we like to more proactively look at student demand is thinking about how you can leverage your degree audit data to see, what your students truly need and how many seats you need to be offering. Degree audit data is really great because it can show you, not just what courses your students have already taken, but also which ones that they still need to take. And this gets even more powerful when you think about pairing this with program maps. So you say, okay, a student needs to still complete XYZ course, what term are they likely to take this course? And then this can start giving you a fuller picture of what type of demand there is for a fuller course. Of course, that being said, I think no one has time to manually go through student by student and make these calculations. That would be quite painful, if not impossible. So the way that we approach this in the CourseDog platform is we integrate with your degree audit system, and then we're able to pull up these analytics that show you how many seats you need for each course. So as you can see on the right side of the screen here, it shows you both where you're more likely to need more seats, but on the flip side, where you might not need quite as many. And I think this is really great because it gives you a more proactive picture of, how we can meet students' needs and also where we can maybe be redirecting some resources to meet that. Okay, so once the schedule is created, we've determined how many sections are going to be offered. It's now time to think about, which instructors we're going to be assigning to each scheduled section. And this is surprisingly a pretty complex process. So of course, that depends on the type of faculty you have, what type of contract they're under, but there's a bunch of different factors that go into this, looking at not just teaching responsibilities, but other areas they might be involved in, whether that's research, service, or perhaps they have a course release for other types of responsibilities. So what this means for all of you is I'm sure that you're hunting down all this information, trying to keep track of it across multiple locations, and then use that information to determine how many sections any given faculty member can teach. And it's really powerful to be able to incorporate all this information into one scheduling tool. This is great because schedulers can now immediately see, which instructors are available and also assess where instructors, might have too much assigned to them or where they have more room to assign more courses there. And another great thing here is, once an instructor is assigned to a section, that load will then be automatically updated and reflected across the tool. So when you go to select the next course, you'll already have all that information there right in the same place. Okay, so one of the final parts of this process is thinking about, assigning rooms to the schedule, but also thinking about other ways that we use our rooms on campus. So of course, I think the primary purpose of most of our spaces on campus are to hold classes. But that being said, I know there's a lot going on across campus, whether that's, student clubs, meetings, events, conferences. We could go on, but there's a lot going on. And however, I know that a lot of institutions use different systems to book their classes versus their non-academic events. So you're toggling back and forth between two systems. And this can get complicated pretty quickly. You might have to deal with double bookings or trying to figure out what room is available when. Scheduling both your academic and non-academic in one place really allows for institutions to make and see their bookings in one central location. And I think this is really great because it eliminates that confusion over, oh, like where do I need to go to make this room reservation? And you're also eliminating some of that back and forth of, oh, I need to email a certain person to get approval, and then they check the system, and then they email me back. But we can get rid of that, or almost always get rid of that by moving into one place. And this also allows users to see and request all the information that they need in one place. So a centralized system should show users space features such as, capacities, floor plans, indicate what type of resources they might need from number of chairs, tables, AV equipment, all of that good stuff. And there are a few other benefits too that I want to highlight here. First, around room transparency and availability. I think it's not just important to know that for any outstanding requests, but also think about your facility staff, building staff, folks who really do need to know who is where when, and when they'll be able to go in and perhaps service the building. Another great benefit here is the centralized calendar. So in one place, you can see what's going on, again, both for those academic and non-academic events. So gone are the days of, toggling back and forth between those two calendars and trying to figure out how they match up. And the last couple of things I want to call out here are double bookings. Definitely pretty frustrating when someone experiences that. And then also pulling room reports. So that data accessibility piece that we've touched on. Being able to pull this information from one place, I think, gives you a really comprehensive view of how your space is being used, and perhaps maybe how you can be using it a bit more efficiently.
The last area that we'll be diving into today is on the assessment side, which I'm sure you all know is really critical both for accreditation purposes, but also really for continuous improvement of your institution. And it is really hard to get it right. Here we're really focusing on assessment of learning outcomes from student level outcomes to course to program, all the way to those institutional level outcomes that you might be assessing on a continuous cadence at your institutions. So what we see in the current assessment landscape is really many assessment challenges stemming from irregularities across how units create their assessment plans and just lead their assessment process. What we typically see is that each unit, whether that's a student office, a specific department, even within a specific program, really creates their own form of their assessment plan with different types of information, potential different timeline, and different way of then reporting out on the results. And this can really lead to missing information and lots of back and forth and misalignment across units and assessment administrators. Typically, very concretely, a lot of institutions don't have one central place to collect assessment plans, and those plans really live across multiple locations. I'd say we either see institutions having no real tool at all supporting their assessment process, or potentially having kind of point solutions used for only within specific departments or specific units. And so it can also look like different email spreadsheets, really kind of spreadsheets looking across the plans, a lot of online folders, or as I mentioned, potentially tools that are sparsely used across the institution. As I'm sure you can relate to, that makes it really difficult to keep track of all the assessment you're doing at an institution, at your institution, and really drive for completion, and then ultimately for that continuous improvement that you're really looking for to drive better student outcomes. What we see, unfortunately, is that many faculty also tend to dislike that process because it's time-consuming for them. It's not streamlined in a way that aligns with the rest of their processes, such as grading within the LMS. And really, they typically like the visibility into the results, right? So, what are those outcomes assessment really used for, and what kind of actions are we taking as a result? Once assessment plans have been collected, the results and the student outcomes analyzed, reviewed, as I'm sure you all know, the next critical step is really what we're calling closing the loop, right? So writing out the resulting findings, recommendations, and action items, and then actually acting on those recommendations. That phase is absolutely essential for translating data insight into actual meaningful improvements, again, both for program quality and student outcomes. That process of closing the loop can be really complex. It's typically very cross-functional. It's typically over time, right? We're talking about processes that span over terms, if not years. And without really clear direction, ownership, and a place to solve that information, it can be really difficult to actually put those recommendations into place and then track changes to evaluate the impact that they have, and then evaluate those during future assessment cycles. So I'll go briefly into kind of some ways that we've seen institutions successfully addressing those challenges, and really to complete turning around how they're able to think about and do assessment at their institution. The first thing, similar to the curriculum side, that we see being really, really helpful is kind of standardizing what an assessment plan is, right? Through standardized forms. What are the guidelines that everyone, all units across your institutions should be following, and in what way, right? So what should curriculum maps look like? What type of information should they be using? What does a good measure contain, right? To be assessing an outcome. How many student results on average do we want to be able to make the right decisions, etc. So really having those clear guidelines embedded within the standardized flows really helps faculty, assessment coordinators, department chairs, etc. really understand what information is expected, reduce ambiguity, and help you ensure that the reviews you're doing and the assessments you're doing are really going to lead you to the insights and subsequent actions that you're looking for. This is also particularly critical when specific information is needed for accreditation, right? So typically as part of your accreditation report, part of that is submitting some evidence of continuous improvement, so of your assessment cycles. And so you really want to make sure that you're able to show that you're collecting all the necessary information and able to get the insights needed for that continuous improvement for your students, and really have that, not be something, have accreditation really not be something that you have to worry about, but really, really table stakes when it comes to how you lead your assessment process. So the other thing, yeah, I started touching on here is really transitioning from dispersed data storage to a single centralized platform that helps address collection challenges. Having all of them in one place really allows your assessment coordinator, your other administrators to really have a complete picture of all the assessments going on at the institution and really be able to push for progress and make sure that faculty and others are submitting the evidence needed throughout the term and yeah, in a timely manner. Um, as I touched on, it's also really important to try and reduce the burden on faculty who are needing to submit typically assessment of student outcomes. And so what we've seen really be most effective for that is twofold. One, enabling them to stay within the flows that they're already used to, right? So if they're already grading within the LMS, for example, really enabling them to stay within that context and really have the additional assessment outcomes grading be an easy and intuitive part of their flow. And the other one, like I mentioned, is really starting to give them that transparency and visibility into the end-to-end process, right? So how is any of this actually helping your institution's education and the student outcomes, and how does it get then reflected into the decisions, whether it's on programs, courses, how you teach those courses, at what point in time in a student's journey, et cetera. So really giving them that visibility into the impact of the work you're asking them to do. So yeah, that greater visibility also allows units that have developed really strong assessment plans to share insights and best practices with others, right? You really want everyone to be all in on this process and really promoting overall institutional improvement.
Almost muted myself there. Thanks, Claire. That was great. So I know that we have covered a ton, and we are almost at Q&A. But before we get there, I know that I think thinking through these change processes can be quite overwhelming, and we often see that our partners take a phased approach to this, right? So they're only choosing one or two functions in particular to think about revamping before they get to the rest. So regardless of, whether you're just focusing on one area right now, or perhaps you're thinking about how you can overhaul your entire academic operations ecosystem, we want to walk through a couple frameworks about how you can successfully think through these changes. When I talk with a lot of our partners, I always like to ask them, what set you up for success when you were, say, implementing a new scheduling process or a new curriculum management tool? And they almost always tell me that it's super important to map your process out before you even begin the change. So even if you think that you already have a pretty strong process in place, this is a great time to take a step back, evaluate, and see where you have some opportunities to make adjustments. So first, how can we identify some of the current gaps in our given process? This is a great time to look for perhaps redundant work where you're currently doing manual data entry, or for some of those more error-prone activities. Next, what types of information and what types of forms will we be collecting? If you're planning to introduce workflows, how many of those do you think you're going to need? Just one, or are there probably a couple of different ones that you're going to need to set up? So this is particularly relevant for areas like the curriculum approval process or thinking about assessment plans. And then, of course, how many steps are there in a given process and who is involved at each step along the way? Again, I think this is something that most folks might already have established, but I think this is a great opportunity to look at perhaps where we should be involving more parties here, even if it's just hey, FYI, we're doing this, we want to let you know. So for example, when a new program is approved, how can we automatically make sure that the marketing department is aware so they can start promoting it? Next, what type of information are we asking folks to provide? If a section is being scheduled, what do they need to include? If a new course is being proposed, what do they need to include on that form? And then, of course, finally here, who needs to be consulted with these changes? So making sure that relevant departments, leaders, committees, all of those folks are being brought into this process and really making sure that they're able to give their input. That being said, I know that even the most well-planned changes can definitely face resistance on campus. I think it's pretty rare when you'll have 100% of the people on board. So it's really important to make sure that you're addressing their concerns up front. Of course, there are probably always going to be that handful of people who are resistant to change, because they've been working at your institution for years, maybe decades, or maybe they're worried about how their job is going to be impacted or what it means for their day-to-day work. I'm sure, of course, most folks on campus have also probably experienced a bad rollout when it comes to a new change or new technology implementation. I know everyone has their horror stories. So, they're definitely valid concerns. And I think that it's important that we're making sure that we're addressing them. So like we talked about on the previous slide, making sure that you're consulting those relevant stakeholders so they can get a preview of coming changes and provide feedback in advance. So I also think it's really important to address the folks who are already stretched thin. I think that they're probably worried, is this going to take up a lot of my time to implement? What does it mean for my future role? So this can be where it's really impactful to be demonstrating some of the positive benefits coming their way and really showing that value. So of course, talking about, how will it save time, but also, how is this going to positively impact students? How is it going to make a difference in their day-to-day interactions with your institution or with that administrative unit? So I think these are all super important considerations to be thinking about when you're planning for your communication plans, rollout plans, and introducing this to campus. So we are almost at Q&A, just a little less than 10 minutes left, but I'll go ahead and pass it off to Claire now for just a very quick overview of Course Dog. But if you have any questions, feel free to start dropping those in.
Thank you, Bridget. Yeah, we'll keep this short. We just want to give you an insight into what that a lot of the solutions we talked to, what that can look like in practice, right? I think it's great to talk through and then really want to give you a line of sight into what it can look like implemented at an institution. And so specifically at CourseDog, we help over 300 institutions streamline their academic operations in a lot of the ways that we were just discussing. And so instead of juggling multiple systems, you really get one platform that bidirectionally integrates with both your SIS and your LMS to really help you handle everything from curriculum planning to scheduling to assessment and student outcomes like we just touched on. Having all that data in one place really enables you to get really insightful analytics and insights like we touched on, really helping you inform decisions across those processes and really having the data in the place where you're making those decisions and taking those actions as you go. What's really helpful here, as we touch on, these are a lot of processes. As you can see here, these are a lot of tools helping you support those. And so we typically see that you can, recommend that you start with what you need most, what's the biggest pain point in your institution that you're looking to solve, and really then easily expand with time. So whether your initial focus is on building a more student-centric schedule and doing that faster, or if it's on streamlining your curriculum proposals approval process, or first, we need to ensure that we're meeting our accreditation needs. And so we're going to focus on that first and foremost. It's really, up to where your institution is at and what those initial needs are. And then we're really helping you to then continuously expand and really build together that modernization plan with you to get you to kind of that ideal state that we're discussing today.
All right, great. Well, I think we can go ahead and get to Q&A here. So like I mentioned, feel free to drop any questions that you may have in the Q&A function. I'm actually already seeing one here that was from early in the presentation when we were talking about course scheduling and course demand. And This is a great question here. Amanda was asking, do we have any recommendations or processes when it comes to involving academic advisors who may already have some of that information about class conflicts or student numbers here? So I think this is a great question. I have one thing to share here, and then I'll pass it over to Claire. But I was actually talking with one of our partners about this, and she shared this pretty simple process that her institution put in place. They basically just created a shared Google sheet where all advisors had access to it, and they could go in and put, hey, I just met with a student. They're saying they're having trouble getting into X course. And so that way you can kind of collect that anecdotal information in one place and go ahead and see if there are any trends, multiple areas where students are maybe requesting the same course. And it sounds like it actually has been pretty successful at that institution. She said that there are multiple instances where they've added additional sections because of that student need. So I thought I'd go ahead and share that, but I'll pass it over to Claire now, as I know that she probably has thoughts here as well.
Yeah, no, I love that question because I think something that we really it is key in that work with institutions on is that a lot of this data that we're able to provide and that you should be looking at is meant to complement a lot of the knowledge that everyone at your institution has, not replacing it. I think, as you all know, you have some extremely knowledgeable people across your institution, and especially when it comes to what student needs to be successful, and academic advisors are probably towards the top in terms when it comes to knowing what their students, their specific students need. And so the approach that Bridget mentioned is one we've seen. I think overall, and bear in mind, some of this will depend on if you're doing kind of centralized or decentralized scheduling, but kind of basically either similar to what Bridget is mentioning, asking advisors to contribute their insights potentially as they go throughout their conversations with students. And ideally, doing so in that shared, whether it's that shared spreadsheet or if you do have a dashboard similar to what we're showing, where you're already gathering also or like pulling all the data information for the trends you're seeing, then having them contribute there directly. The other approach is to start with this data. So if you do have course demand projections data or historical data you're able to look at, reviewing this with advisors. And you don't need to review all of it necessarily, but if you know that there's some critical changes that you're going to make from one term to another, so doubling the number of sections for a course, or maybe actually reducing it or completely changing when you're offering a set of section that's going to pretty significantly impact those students. I think you can selectively review, decide which one of those you want to review with advisors to make sure there isn't any additional kind of anecdotal information that you missed, and make sure that advisors' insights are aligned with what you're seeing kind of from the broader data set.
Great. Well, if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to go ahead and drop them in here. Also, feel free to follow up with us after the webinar if anything comes up. But I know we are almost at our time here, so I want to just do one final poll question here before we get to our goodbyes. Just a very quick yes or no here, and then we can let everyone go on their way. All right, well, we have less than a minute left, so I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This was a great discussion. Loved learning about why you all are thinking about academic operations, and definitely value that you're spending your time here with us today. So thanks so much, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you in the future. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions for us.